Hi everyone, today we'll be going through a quick run through of how to structure a response for question 5 for AQA's English Language Paper 2. Now, as we know, this paper is non-fiction based, so for question 5 we'll be writing to argue, persuade or explain. Now, for all the formats they can ask you to write in, so whether that's a letter, a news article entry or a speech, you will always need to write persuasively. So we'll go through how to ensure we do that and also look at an example structure and then use that to create an example plan for a top grade response. I'll also be leaving some past exam questions at the end which you can use to practice forming arguments for. Okay, let's quickly get an idea of timing. So for question 5, you want to spend around 5 to 10 minutes planning. Now, planning is really important because it will help you map out your argument so that you can avoid repeating the same points. Also, it's a chance for you to decide the tone of your writing and how formal it needs to be, depending on who your audience is. However, saying that, it's also essential to remember not to spend too long planning just so you can completely avoid cutting into your writing time. Next, you want to spend around 30 minutes writing and leave a few minutes to check over your work at the end. Now let's take a look at an example structure. So first we have our introduction, which can also function as our hook. Now it's really important to have a strong opening. Great examples of introductions include starting with a fact or a rhetorical question. This immediately lets the examiner know that you're writing to intrigue and persuade the reader. Make sure that you clearly capture the idea of the statement early in your writing. An example might be something like, every year thousands of people use airplanes to travel abroad, but are we wasting money and ruining the environment when we could enjoy summer more locally? You can see how this indicates what the writing will be discussing, and through the tone of the rhetorical question, the student has already taken a side of the argument which they'll go on to discuss in the rest of their response. My one key tip would be to make sure that you don't say I agree or I disagree, because you're writing in a format where you wouldn't usually do that, so try to make sure that you start with something that aligns with the format that you're being asked to write in. Now on to your first main point. So to make sure you have a strong starting point, use a persuasive technique and relevant examples, and make sure you're doing this throughout your writing. The 4 key techniques to ensure you include among your other language and structural techniques are the following. So the first 2 we have are direct address and rhetorical questions. This is an example we looked at in a previous video where I did a walkthrough of the full paper, so I'd really recommend you watch that too. I'll make sure to link it for you below. But essentially you can say something like, do you really believe students are currently as productive as they can be? This exemplifies a rhetorical question and the use of direct address. Now looking at the last 2 key persuasive techniques, which are the use of facts and statistics and the use of an anecdote. You might choose to say a fact like 85% of students sacrifice outdoor activity due to spending this time indoors completing homework. Now remember, this doesn't have to be true, but it just has to align with and support your argument. So it's obvious that this example would be in support of the idea that there needs to be less homework to allow students more free time. An example of an anecdote for this might be a head teacher saying, "We're seeing more students overwhelmed by the volume of homework." Adding this anecdote in somewhere in your writing will act as a great and effective persuasive technique. Now, the quote that you decide on can be something really short, but make sure it's impactful. Nothing too long and no need for any personal accounts that take away from the core focus of your writing. And again, just a quick reminder that although these techniques are key to use, make sure you remember to use other language and structural techniques too. I'd really advise recapping on the different techniques you might like to use in your writing before the exam. Now, when you get to writing your second point, offer a counter-argument and then refute it. This shows balance, which will advance your persuasive writing. So here let's say that you frame your argument to say that you think the day should be restructured so that students have more time to sleep. Your counter-argument might be that some may argue or believe starting school later would make the day less productive and clash with parents' work schedules. However, when refuting this and reinstating your point, you might say that even though that's somewhat true, studies actually show that well-rested students perform better academically, so the long-term benefits actually outweigh the temporary routine changes. So now looking at point 3, link your idea or argument back to real life and relate it to a wider context. So usually at this point, it's great to start thinking about using emotive language to close off your writing. Just make sure that you still sound very strong and confident in your tone. It's really important to maintain this, especially after we just presented the counter-argument in point 2. Also remember that just because we've said 3 points, it doesn't mean you have to write just 3 paragraphs. If you choose to spread a point over a couple of paragraphs to develop it even more, that's absolutely fine. Just ensure that you don't run out of time. Okay, so finally we have the conclusion, which should strongly summarize your point of view with impact to close off your argument. So that's the general structure which you can apply to any format you're given, and of course feel free to advance this or amend it so that it sounds more natural to your style of writing. Just a quick reminder, if you're finding this helpful, please don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Now let's have a look at an exam question together and use this structure to make a quick plan for it. So the statement they've given us is about homework having no value and the idea that students should be able to relax in their free time. And they want us to write an article for a newspaper. So we already know that we'll be writing formally. Now I'm going to list the key techniques I want to make sure that I remember to use because they can be really easy to forget in the rush of the exam. And then I'm going to decide what take I'll have on this statement. So let's say I agree that homework does not have any value and that students should be able to relax in their free time. For my introduction, I want to make sure that I immediately catch the reader's eye. Or in other words, like we said, this is the first impression the examiner has of our creative non-fictional writing. So I want to make sure it really works to intrigue the reader. Let's decide to open with a rhetorical question. We can say, "Another evening wasted on worksheets you'll never see again." Sound familiar? In my introduction, I can discuss how homework often lacks value, is inconsistently done, and eats into students' time when they should be resting or developing their skills. As you can see, we're closely echoing the wording in the given statement, which helps remind the examiner that we're keeping in frame of the question. Next, we can make a point about homework being ineffective and unfair. We could discuss the idea that many students copy, get help, or avoid it completely. So homework doesn't actually reflect the true ability of the student. Again, notice how I'm using the ideas presented in the statement to derive points from. We could also say that teachers already assess learning in class, so why should we have to repeat it at home? This is also a great place to back it up with a fact. So we can state that a study found that homework had minimal impact on progress in secondary school students. Now we can make our second point, which would fall around the middle of our writing, so this is where we can bring in our counter-argument. We can say that it can be argued that homework teaches responsibility, and then refute this by saying the same responsibility can come from real-life activities and hobbies, like part-time jobs or family chores, and other non-academic activities which schools aren't able to facilitate. And finally, our last point to start closing off our argument can include a discussion of mental health and the stress homework induces in students. As we want to end on an emotional note, it worked really effectively to include an anecdote here. For example, you could say, "My younger sister used to cry over maths homework. Now her school has cut it and she's thriving." And you could also reinforce this with a fact like Finland have minimal homework and some of the best education systems in the world. And finally, for our conclusion, we need to summarize our argument. So this is the final message we have for our reader and the lasting impression we want to leave on the examiner. So as we said when we were looking at our structure, make sure you have an impactful close. And that's great, so plan done. If you'd like to have a go at practicing writing a full response using this, then make sure to pause or screenshot and have a go. Also have a go at creating your own plan for the following past exam questions. Now that's all for the question 5 exam structure. Let me know what your template looks like in the comments. Now, as always, I really hope it was helpful. If it was, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video.